Hey there, in this video, I'm going to show you a trick that is going to enable you to quickly, easily, and almost automatically generate music that sounds like this. And like this. And like this. And like this. It's kind of an alternative to creating chord progressions, and it gives you a harmonically and rhythmically complex foundation of interrelated notes that you can then build on top of in various ways. I'll be demonstrating different aspects of it with the equipment that you see right here, but you don't need any of these things to do it. You can apply the basic ideas to just about anything that can produce music, not just other synths and groove boxes, but also digital audio workstations and even traditional music instruments like the guitar. I'm going to start off with showing some of the basic ideas on the 8-bit warps, and even if you don't have an 8-bit warps or you don't care about it, I would suggest not fast forwarding, because what I'm going to explain and show here is going to be applicable to anything else, and all of the rest of the sections of this video are going to presuppose that you already know what I talked about in this one. Okay, so this is basically a 4-step process, and the first step is to create a sequence of notes. And the easiest way to do this is to only use notes that are in the pentatonic scale of the key that you're in. Now, in case you have no idea what I'm talking about, here's a quick explanation. So let's take a normal scale in the key of C, which is just the white keys on the keyboard. Now that scale begins here, and then goes up to here, an octave higher. And if we count the notes, we can go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then back to 1, an octave up. And a pentatonic scale is the same exact notes, except we don't play the 4th one or the 7th one, which are also two notes that sound pretty weird when you put them together. So if we omit the 4th and the 7th, and we only play the remaining notes, we get 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 1. And then this keeps going up. And it goes down. Now, if that's too hard to remember, there is a very simple and easy to play pentatonic scale. It's the one that begins in the key that begins on this note. And if we do the same thing as before, and we count the notes in this scale, in the normal version of the scale in this key, we go 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's a note we're not going to play. 5, 6, 7. So another note we're not going to play, and then back to 1. So in other words, we're just going to play the black keys. And if you've ever wondered why only playing the black keys sounds pretty cool, well, this is why. It's because the black keys form a pentatonic scale. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use these pentatonic notes to create a sequence of notes in the sequencer. And to keep things nice and simple, I'm just going to create a 16-step sequence where I'm going to have one note per step. Which, if I turn my BPM down to 40, which is the next thing you're going to want to do, not necessarily 40, but just way down to make it nice and slow, our sequence is going to sound like this. So it's not very interesting, but just hold on a minute. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do here is I'm just going to record that sequence onto one of the loop tracks of the 8-bit warps. So now we have that on loop. And now what I'm going to do is this. So first, I'm going to take the sequence of notes and I'm going to transpose it. And we have a few options here. One option is to go -5 semitones down. So 5 semitones would be, for example, taking this note and then going down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Which in the key we're in takes us from here and then skips this note, and this note. And then the same thing is going to happen with all of the notes in the sequence. And now if we put these two sequences together, our original one and the one that's been transposed, -5 semitones, we're going to end up with this. creating basically a partial chord here. Now, -5 is not our only option. We could also go down -7, which would take us from here down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, which combined with our original sequence would sound like this. Alternatively, we could go up 5 semitones, 7 semitones, or we could even go up an entire octave, 12 semitones, or down -12 semitones, down an entire octave. Now I'm going to go back to -7, which remember sounds like this. And now what I'm going to do is this. I am going to go to the note value of the notes in my sequence, and I'm going to change them from 16th notes to dotted 16th notes. And that is going to sound like this. So much more interesting sounding, and the reason why, and the way I think about this, is that by transposing the notes, what we're doing is we're spreading them out in sort of harmonic or melodic space. And then by changing the note values, what we're doing is we're also changing the notes in time. So time and space, we're changing the notes in both of those dimensions, which results in this much more multi-dimensional arrangement of the notes in relation to each other. So now I'm going to go ahead and actually record this sequence onto the second loop track. Okay, so that was basically step 3, and then step 4 is just to repeat the same process. So I'm going to take the same exact sequence, and this time instead of transposing down -7, I could go up to +7, for example. Could also do +5 or octaves, but I'm going to do +7. And then I'm also going to go to the note value and slow this down yet again. So I'm going to go from dotted 16th notes to dotted 8th notes. And there are other note values that you could experiment with too, but for this, I'm just going to use dotted notes. Okay, so now we're up 7 semitones, and we've slowed down to dotted 8th notes, which sounds like this. Even more boring by itself, but if we put those notes in relationship to the notes we've already recorded, now we're going to sound like this. And I'm actually going to go ahead and just record our new sequence onto the third loop track on the 8-bit warps. Okay, and now we can just keep repeating the same process as many times as we want, or as many as our device makes possible. Now on the 8-bit warps, we do have a 4th loop track, but that's only for external instruments. However, we can play the sequencer simultaneously with the loop tracks, and so I'm going to do that for one final version of our sequence. Let's try going up an entire octave, and then I'm going to slow down the notes from dotted 8th notes to dotted quarter notes. And so these notes are going to be really slow. They're going to sound like this. And since they're so slow and there's that huge gap of silence in between them, what I would often do here is take the release and increase the value. And I actually increased the sustain as well. Okay, so now if we play our 3 loop tracks with our new version of the sequence all at the same time, it's going to sound like this. And one thing that can be nice to do with this final track is to play around with the knobs as it gets played so that we have some evolution in the sound over time. Can also play around with bringing tracks in and out, or starting them and stopping them at different times. And you can also play around with playing lead parts on top of this foundation that you've created. Can be a really fun way to just improvise things as well for jamming purposes. And like I said at the beginning, it provides an alternative to chord progressions. Okay, so now I'm going to use the SmplTrek to demonstrate something else you can do here. Because a big limitation of what I showed you before was that you could only use notes from the pentatonic scale, which is a bit limiting. And there's actually a way to get around that limit and break that rule that I showed you with the first demonstration. So to show you this, what I first want to do here is show you why we need that rule in the first place, and then I'll show you what we can do to get around it. And to do this, what I'm going to do on the SmplTrek is I'm going to create a new instrument track, and I'm going to use the built-in string sample, which sounds like this. Now, quick little bonus tip, string samples usually sound a lot better if we increase the release on them, maybe put in a little bit of attack, and then also crank up the reverb. Much better. Okay, now what I'm going to do for this demonstration is I'm going to input the entire sequence of notes in the key of C, a C major scale. So and then I'll just go right back down. Maybe I'll decrease the release a little bit on this. And then just like before, I'm also going to decrease our BPM to 40. Maybe let's decrease the release a little bit more. Okay, so now I'm going to take that track and I'm going to copy it and paste it to create a duplicate. And then I'm going to take the second track and let's begin by transposing it down -7 semitones. Okay, now I'm going to go into the second track, and as the sequence gets played, the SmplTrek is going to light up the notes on the keyboard. And I want you to watch them and pay attention to where they are. So remember, we were originally in the key of C, which is only the white keys. So if we are still in the key of C, then we should only see these keys get lit up, but that is not what's going to happen. Instead, what's going to happen is this. Notice how with our fourth note, we hit this black key right here. And that's because when we transpose down -7 semitones, the fourth note in our original scale gets bumped into a different key, which is why we avoided it before, to prevent that from happening. And the same exact thing actually happens if we transpose up 5 semitones. So -7 and +5 are basically the reverses of each other. And I can demonstrate that to you real quick by just playing this again. So watch the keys again. So once again, our fourth note in our scale gets bumped into a different key. And so if we want to prevent that from happening, what we need to do is we need to find that fourth note, so this guy right here, and what we need to do is we need to take this note and move it either down or up a semitone. And since we already have a note down here, I'm going to choose to move it up like this. And then I'm going to do the same thing over here. There's my fourth note again. I'm going to delete it and then create another note 1 semitone above it. And so now if I play my sequence, well, our fourth note is sounding pretty funky because it's this one right here, which is the 7th one in our scale right before we get back to the main note, the tonic. And the 7th note always sounds kind of funky for reasons that are too complicated to go into here. But even though it sounds funky, at least it's in the same key as our original key. Okay, so that's what we need to do if we're transposing down -7 semitones or up +5 semitones. If we're playing the fourth note in our scale, the fourth degree of the key that we're in, that note is going to get bumped into a different key. And in order to bring it back into our original key, we're going to need to either bring it down or bring it up, a semitone just being one little step on the keyboard. Okay, so that's going down -7 or up +5 semitones. But what if we want to go down -5 semitones or up +7 semitones? Well, let me show you that next. So I'm just going to delete that second instrument track that I just created, and I'm going to copy the first one once again, and then I'm going to transpose this track down -5 semitones. Okay, so now let's watch this on the keyboard. Remember, if we're in our original key, only the white notes are going to light up, but that's not what is going to happen. Instead, one of the black keys is going to light up. So notice when we get to the 7th note in our sequence, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, we go up to the black keys, and now we're in a different musical key. And so now, just like before, we want to bring this note back into our original key. We're going to have to either raise or lower it a semitone. So this time we are targeting our 7th note, which is this guy right here. And if I raise it, well, I could raise it, but I already have a note there. So instead, I'm just going to lower it and put it right there. Same thing with that note in the second half of our sequence. Okay, so now if we play our sequence, that 7th note in our scale has been brought back into our original key. And so to recap, depending on whether you're transposing 5 or 7 semitones up or down, if you play the 4th or 7th note of the key that you're in, you're going to have to raise or lower that note a semitone to bring it back into your original key. And I'll put some reminders of what to do in the video description below. Okay, so with all of that in mind, let me show you how to actually apply this idea. I'm going to clear the sequence of our scale, and now I'm going to put in a little melodic line. And I'm going to make this 32 steps this time. And I'm going to play some longer notes like this. So I have this note going from steps 1 to 4. Then I'll put in another note like that. Then I'm going to go up. Then down. And this time I'm going to play the 4th note in my scale. And so I definitely want to make a mental note of that, because I'm going to have to come back to that note and fix it a little bit when I do my transposition later on. But for now, let's just keep going with our melodic line. So okay, so altogether, that's going to sound like this. And now I'm going to copy that down into another track, and then I'm going to transpose this down -7. And then remember, since we're transposing down -7, when we hit that 4th note in our scale, the 4th degree of our key, the note is going to go outside of our original key. So if we play our sequence, we see one of the black keys lighting up. And so just like with my demonstration before, what we need to do is we need to find that note, and we need to raise or lower it a semitone to bring it into our key. And since I already have a note lower down, I'm going to raise the note. Okay, so now if we play them together, we avoid going outside of our original key. And now what we can do is the same trick as before. So we spread out our notes in melodic or harmonic or whatever we want to call it space, and now we're going to spread them out in time by assigning different note values to them. So instead of 16th notes, let's try dotted 16th notes again. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy my first original track again, and this time let's transpose up +7, change the note value to dotted 8th notes, and this time, because we're going up 7 semitones and we didn't actually target the 7th note or 7th degree of our scale, we don't have to worry about going outside of our original key. We can see that if we follow the keyboard. all of the notes were being played on the white keys, which are the keys in the key of C. Okay, and then if we want to, we can repeat the trick one more time. This time, let's slow all the way down to dotted quarter notes, and then transpose down an entire octave. And since it's an octave, we also don't have to worry about going outside of our key. And so now on the fourth track, we're going to be playing some really slow, low notes like this. It's super boring by itself, but it's going to add a nice little kind of bass line to our music here. And something I really want you to pay attention to here is our progress as each of these 4 tracks is getting played. So that progress is shown by a little vertical bar that shows the position of the playhead in each one of the tracks. And I want you to notice how the playheads are all in different positions in relation to each other because different versions of the sequence are being played at different velocities since the note values are different. So keep an eye out for that. Notice how our first track is almost done, and now it's going to repeat, whereas the other tracks are still playing each other out. Now the second one is about to repeat. Meanwhile, the third one is halfway in between. Fourth one is like a quarter of the way through. Now the fourth one is almost done. The third one is almost done, and the fourth one is only halfway through. And so what that means is that this sort of tapestry of notes that we've created is continually evolving. It's not just getting repeated over and over again. Like each time the first track gets repeated, something different is happening in the other 3 tracks. And that's again because the playheads are advancing at different speeds. And it's not until the 4th track reaches the end and restarts that all of the playheads come back together, and then the entire tapestry repeats itself. But that takes a while to happen. And this is just with a 32-step sequence. You can imagine how long it would take if we had a 128-step sequence. Okay, so that's an example of doing this in a much slower sort of way than my first example, and also using a note outside of the pentatonic scale. And then before I showed you how you can play a lead line on top of this foundation of music that you've created. And another thing you can do, which I'll demonstrate with the SmplTrek, is that you can stick in a rhythm track. And I'm just going to use a preset here, like, I don't know, let's try Breakbeats 1 with the Ski Beats kit. That's going to sound like this. And it's super slow because of how low our BPM is. So what I'm also going to do here is I'm going to speed up our note value to 30-second notes, which is going to basically double the speed of the drums. And now if we put that all together, and we can use the SmplTrek's new Perform feature to play a little lead line on top of all this. And of course, if I wanted to, I could change all these instruments up so that each one has a different voice, and we could do something completely different than this sort of orchestral string sound that we're doing. Let's try something more synthy. Okay, I just went through and assigned a kind of random synth to each one of these tracks. I have no idea how this is going to sound, but the final result sounds like this. Of course, another thing we could do here is mess around with the EQ and also the panning. Let's just do some panning here real quick. Put some stuff to the left, some stuff to the right. Anyway, you get the idea. Okay, so now I've connected my SmplTrek to my Sonicware Texture Lab, and I'm going to be using the SmplTrek as a MIDI controller for the Texture Lab, and I'm going to use the same exact instrument tracks that we used before, only this time they're going to be triggering notes on the Texture Lab. I have a sample loaded up already. This is a sample I've used before. It was originally me just blowing some air across an empty wine bottle. And so now I can play any of these tracks from the SmplTrek on the Texture Lab. And I'm actually not going to play the first track because I think it's going to be too fast for this sort of more ambient music that I'm trying to create here. I mean, objectively that's not very fast, but by ambient standards it kind of is. So I'm just going to play tracks 2, 3, and 4. And once again, if I want to play a lead on top of this, I can. And so this can be a great way to get an ambient track going as well. And by the way, you could also do this in reverse. You could change the note values and transpose on the Texture Lab, a sequence that you build on the Texture Lab, and then record it onto something like the SmplTrek or a DAW or whatever you have for recording, and do it that way too. By the way, one more little bonus tip. If you look really closely, you might notice that I still just have instrument tracks here. I haven't converted them into MIDI tracks. And for some reason, don't ask me why, but if you have a device connected to the SmplTrek through MIDI, instrument tracks will function as MIDI tracks. They will trigger MIDI notes on your other device. All right, one more thing I want to demonstrate here. This time I'll use the OP-1. I'm in the endless sequencer, and I'm going to put in another little sequence of notes. This time, just to keep things simple, I'll only use notes from a pentatonic scale. I'll do the Black Keys one. Once again, I'll bring the BPM way down, and then inside of the 4-track recorder on the OP-1, I'm going to hold down my middle C in order to get the sequence at the same pitch as I originally played it. And I'll record that onto the track. Okay, now I'm going to go back to the sequencer, and I'm going to change the note values. And on the endless sequencer, we actually don't have dotted 16th notes or dotted 8th notes. So I am going to use triplet 8th notes instead. And this is to show that you don't have to use the note values that I did before with the dotted notes. You can change it up in any way you want. And so with the endless sequencer on the OP-1, we control the starting pitch by placing our finger on the keyboard, with middle C being the original pitch. And if I want to go down -5 semitones, well, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And if I want to go down 7, well, that would be 6, 7. Alternatively, I could go up 5, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Or I could go up 7 semitones, so 6, 7. And so 5 semitones up is here, which is the 4th degree of our scale, because it goes 1, 2, 3, 4. 7 semitones up is a 5th. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then down -5 semitones. Well, that is our 5th an octave down. Remember, our 5th is up here. And now we're just going an octave down. And -7 semitones is our 4th an octave down. Okay, so anyway, going back to our tape, now I'm just going to play one of those transpositions. Let's try doing -5 to change things up here yet again, because we don't have to always go down -7 and then up +7. We can mix things around however we want. In fact, we could even go down a whole nother octave and play essentially -17 semitones down, which will sound like this. Could also do the same thing, only 1 octave down and then -7 semitones down. If I wanted to go really crazy, I could go 2 octaves down. Or I could go 1 octave up, and then I could go up this way. For example, 5 or 7 semitones plus an octave. Or you could go back to any of the previous things that I showed you and create an initial melody line that is much more complex. So, for example, we could do something like... So now we have a melody line with different lengths of notes. Let's record that. Do our transposition trick, 7 semitones. Let's try quarter note triplets this time. Record that on top of our initial sequence. Now let's go down -7 semitones. Change the note value to, I don't know, half note triplets. Record that. And finally, let's go down a whole octave, slow this down to, I don't know, quarter notes, and play all of that simultaneously. All sorts of possibilities to explore here, and that was just with synthesizers and groove boxes. Like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, you could really do this with anything. For example, here's my guitar, and most people who own a guitar also own something that is basically an automatic transposition device, which is called a capo. And I can't actually play this because my camera's not set up right, but just to demonstrate the idea, you could put your capo here, place something way up here on the fretboard, and then if you wanted to transpose it down, -7 semitones, well, you just take your capo and go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 frets down. Or you could go 5 steps down. Or you could go a whole octave down by taking off the capo altogether. And if you really know your fretboard, you also don't even need to use a capo because, well, you can just use your finger as a capo basically. But that would be a topic for a whole nother video, and I think this one has gone on for long enough. So remember, I'm going to put a kind of reference table in the description for the various transpositions and things you need to keep in mind with that, so check that out. All right, that's all I've got. Have a great day, and goodbye for now.